Yeah, that's. And so most of them might be the one I do that. I took one. So that's why the water says it, and I know it's a name that I. So it could be that way. Yeah, yeah. I liked her. She was, everybody has their own preference. She was a little too verbal. I don't like a lot of like. Yeah, so that was, I was like, but I thought her. Which is, yeah, which is great, but I need to. Yeah, it's the right thing. Yeah, did I end up in the hospital? Yeah. Have you been doing it? Yeah, walking on, especially. Better. And that you can log yourself. Yeah. People I know. That's really cool. Yeah, that's really fun. That's what I'm like.
Yeah. Very morning.
All right, y'all, we should probably go ahead and get started. You want to bring it all together here? Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Happy May. I think I can just go ahead and get started with the introductory remarks, and then we can go into the public comment period. So this is the thing that I read because I have to. Good evening, everyone. My name's Willow, and I'm the City of Eugene staff representative for this meeting. Before the chairs convene the meeting, I have a few reminders and introductory words. I would like to begin by acknowledging that tonight's meeting is being held on Kalapuya Aliki, the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people, who continue to make contributions in their communities here and across the land we now refer to as Oregon. We express our respect to all displaced Indigenous people who call Eugene home. The purpose of the Active Transportation Committee is to advise the City of Eugene staff and community organizations and partners on the implementation of Eugene's pedestrian and bicycle strategic plan, to represent community and constituent interests in transportation planning decisions, and to provide feedback to staff on projects relating to walking and biking. Eugene City staff will consider recommendations from the ETC along with input from other members of the public during decision-making processes. Please keep in mind that this meeting is being both recorded and live streamed to YouTube, meaning that it can be viewed on the City of Eugene Transportation Planning YouTube channel, both right now and in the future. All verbal and written commentary will be held in the public record. Today's meeting begins with a 15-minute public comment period. The public comment period is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Active Transportation Committee on transportation-related issues. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak, and we'll begin by seeing if anybody online would like to give public comment. Let me open up the participants panel here. Yeah, if you would like to give public comment and you're online, go ahead and use the raise hand feature, and then I'll allow you to speak. It looks like we have one person here, Jeff Mack, so I'm going to go ahead and bring you on. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. So this is about the pedestrian crossing at 22nd and Chambers. And I'll just start into my prepared statements that I wrote last night. My name is Jeffrey Mack. I've lived on the southeast corner of 22nd and Chambers for a little over 5 years now. In that time, I've witnessed numerous car collisions out my office window while working in my driveway or gardening in my yard. I have seen and experienced countless close calls and incidents of aggressive and unsafe driving along Chambers while walking, biking, and driving. I have had 3 of my own vehicles damaged while parked along 22nd when cars came around the corner off Chambers too quickly and were not able to control their vehicle. And just on Tuesday, May 9th, While working near the bottom of my driveway, I found myself in a position of having to intervene to protect two young children riding their bikes when once again a car came careening around the corner off of Chambers and chased the two boys over to the middle school parking lot before the driver exited his car in a fit of road rage, claiming he needed to teach them a lesson. So it may come as no surprise that I was very interested to learn a little over 2 years ago from a city employee surveying the street that Chambers was slated to be repaved soon. Great, I thought to myself. This will be an excellent opportunity to gather and provide some community feedback on some of the issues I discussed above and work with my neighbors, community stakeholders at ATA Middle School, the Boys and Girls Club, and city engineers to come up with a new design for Chambers Street and specifically the crucial bicycle and pedestrian crossing at 22nd Avenue that would hopefully mitigate some of the excessive speeding, dangerous driving behavior, and increase the safety for all road users, automobiles included, not to mention our most vulnerable community members, children simply trying to walk to school. Time passed and I received another mailer saying preliminary work was being done on design. I checked the City of Eugene current projects page with a project information sheet dated February 10th, which stated that in addition to repaving, quote, the project will include a protected bikeway on Chambers Street between North 22nd Avenue and South 22nd Avenue, reconstructed sidewalk access ramps throughout the project, stormwater and wastewater improvements. I was bothered that I didn't recall receiving any notifications about community input, but I thought that the indicated protected bikeway on Chambers would allay most of my concerns, so I didn't worry about it too much. Then we received our latest mailer from the city a few weeks ago, and there was nothing on it about a protected bikeway or any improvements for safety, and in particular, nothing about the school crossing or horrible bike route at 22nd Avenue. I was angry, frustrated, and despondent. Where was my opportunity for community input? Where were the improvements made to safety? What can I do? I heard that the design was, quote, 90% complete and it was a done deal. Well, then I saw that other rear end collision this past Sunday. Then the man chased the two kids on bikes on Tuesday. And then just yesterday on Wednesday, there was yet another bad collision on 18th and Chambers. We cannot allow this carnage to continue while we simply repave the street and insert a new left turn pocket at 23rd Avenue as discussed in the latest mailer. Smoother pavement without any redesign of the street will only lead to cars going faster. I don't know how I would be able to live with myself if the next time I hear a car crash outside my window, then go outside to look, I see the body of a child lying in the street, possibly even one of my own two young sons, and the street got repaved and no meaningful changes to safety were made. I'm a mechanical engineer by training and trade, not a transportation engineer, but I have a long personal history and interest in transportation, urban geography and design, biking for daily transportation, and even automobile racing and engineering. I have an idea for a solution that involves narrowing the road in this spot and expanding the bike path. This design would reduce speeds, make it easier for families to bike and walk across Chambers, and prevent potential deaths. I personally measured the cross-section of the Chambers and its current lane configuration and looked at the MUTCD and other designs around town to come up with this preliminary design. I sketched it in CAD and plan to send it to the project manager soon. I can share my design idea with you as well, and my hope is that this committee will encourage the city to prioritize improving this crossing during the upcoming paving project later this summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to, okay, I'm gonna put my email in the chat. I'm the community engagement coordinator, and I would love it if you would send me the information that you have along with your testimony so I can share it with my team.
Yeah.
And feel free to follow up with me as well.
Okay. So it should just show up in the chat on the right side there.
Yeah. Oh, I think I accidentally sent it to the wrong group. Okay, redo. Okay, now it should have
Yeah.
come.
I see it. Thank you.
Jeff. Okay. Okay, are there any other folks online who would like to give public comment? Okay, let's go ahead and move to those of us that are in person. I've got the sign-in sheet here, and it looks like we'll start with Joan.
Yeah. My name's Joan Medina and I live on 32nd and Hilliard. And I just have a letter I'd like to read to you. Getting outdoors and appreciating nature is one of the many benefits of living in Eugene. My husband and I recently retired and decided to move here so that we can enjoy Eugene's natural beauty. We love walking to the stores and parks. As we were walking and exploring this area, we noticed how many sidewalks are in disrepair and include tripping hazards. Other places are inaccessible because of overhanging branches, parked cars, thorny bushes, and overgrown hedges. We have seen wheelchair users traveling on the street because the sidewalks are inaccessible. This is a concern for people with mobility disabilities, people who are blind, and elderly people. Accessing our communities is an important human right, and creating accessible and inclusive spaces is a social responsibility. For the past few years, cities across the world have celebrated Make Way Day on September 30th. This day began in Ireland to raise awareness about the needs of people with disabilities in public spaces. Communities come together to make the sidewalks in front of their homes accessible by trimming overhanging branches and vegetation, and by repairing cracks and tripping hazards. We propose celebrating Make Way Day here in Eugene. It could be an impactful, community building, and decisive day of action to improve access for everyone. The city of Eugene is a beautiful place to live and thrive. Let's start our own Make Way Day on September 30th and make Eugene accessible for everyone.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Rose.
Of course, I think I actually have some of Joan's letters, so I'll pass them on this way, and if anybody wants a copy, they can take one. And I think we had discussed maybe putting Make Way Day on as an agenda item for a future meeting. So perhaps we could invite you back and we could have like a longer discussion about it if that feels like something the chairs are interested in. Yeah. So I'll chat with the chairs at our next agenda setting meeting and we can sort of decide on.
Right, and Jerry also brought this to our attention, so thank you, Jerry.
Yeah, and we can send a letter out electronically if you're like, you lose pieces of paper.
Okay. The rest of the folks who signed in said no on wanting to speak, but, okay, great. That's what I asked, because I was like.
Alan Hancock. And I noticed in the minutes from April, I did not see the list of people who were in attendance. And I think it's actually required by public meeting law to list the people who are in attendance. Because I was afraid, because I didn't sign in last time, I wasn't there, so I checked. I didn't see anyone's name, so I just want to point that out. For one. And then the second thing is that hearing Joan and Jeff's concerns remind me of something that I shared, I think it was 4 years ago when I was in this position here. And that was about follow-up on public comment. And at the time I had said, when we have a lot of public comment and there's some really good attention, but sometimes it just, goes into the oblivion and people in our community have real important concerns that don't really get addressed in the long run. And at the time Lee said he was going to make Lee Shoemaker, who was in the meeting in the position that Willow is in now, said that he's going to have a document so that they'd have a spreadsheet or some sort of online, I don't know exactly what it was, but a way for people to access to know where those comments stood. That's and to know that there was some action that occurred, some kind of closure, even if it's something, even if it's like we can't do anything about that. So I'm not sure what happened to that, but I think it's a really important piece of closing the loop and engaging citizens.
Mhm.
Thanks, Alan. I'll look into that.
Great, thank you.
Is there a way city staff can come back next month and sort of provide an answer to folks? You know, even though it's maybe not a conclusive answer, but you know.
We've
Say
had
we-
different times we've had staff here comment on the same evening. We've tried different things, but we don't have anything really institutionalized. And it's really an important part of the meeting. So thank you, everyone, for your comments. We do, I know that everybody here is really taking this in. So yeah, we should look into that again. Sue and Willow and I will talk about that. Okay, moving on, we have the next agenda item is to approve the April meeting summary notes. Do we have a motion to approve those notes or any corrections?
Well, in light of what Alan just said, I would say approve them with the list of who was there. List of attendees.
I can do that.
Okay,
I second that.
all those in favor? We skipped this. Okay, approved.
Objection, then motion to approve. Good enough, I don't know.
The
I can
next,
motion when
is that
I'm
okay?
second. That would
Yeah,
be
it was a
perfect.
shortcut, I know. Parking reform and climate friendly and equitable communities. This is a presentation and discussion. So that we're all better informed and have some time to interact around this. And Reed is here. Reed, we haven't met you before,
Yes,
so.
my name is Reed Berner. I'm the land use supervisor with the City of Eugene's Building and Permit Services. So that means my team, whenever there's development permits that come in, we look at the parking portion of the code specifically and figure out how many off-street parking spaces are required to be built based on what the use is and what the size of use is. So it's a presentation about a state rule change that went into effect, and we'll get into it a little bit here. Yeah, nice to meet you all.
Just gonna do some technology things real quick.
Is there a name of the parking reform? Is that a? Yeah, the overall project is called Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities, or CFAC is the shorter name. And then we just named the parking portion of it parking reform.
So point of clarification, Jeff gave us some information. Personally, I happen to agree with what he's saying. Do we get a chance to make a recommendation or throw a motion out and see if we're all interested or not? Or do we have to wait till next month to do that?
The way I see it is that the chairs take the information and along with Willow, we kind of figure out how to slot that.
Okay.
We could do it differently,
Okay.
but that's how, because we don't really provide time for that at this point.
Okay, fine.
If there's extra time in the agenda item, sometimes we can take a couple minutes, but we will.
Okay, great.
Figure that one out.
In addition, Alan and I are both on the bond measure committee, and I don't know if this is a bond measure project or not. I don't recall seeing it there, but if it is, we might have an end to what's up with, so I don't actually think it's a bond measure project, but I can look and see if it is.
I'm not sure either.
Back to Reed.
All right. Okay, so the next slide has a little just brief agenda that we're going to talk about tonight. Give a little summary of the overall climate friendly and equitable communities rule change, or CFAC as it's quickly called, and get into the parking reform specifics, have some opportunity for questions and discussions, and then we'll point out the next steps in the process, the parking specific process. So little overview on what CFAC is. It's a multi-year state required effort to reduce climate pollution from transportation. And a little bit of background here. It was instituted because the state of Oregon has a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% from 1990 levels by the year 2050. And they did some update crunching numbers in 2018 and found out that we were way off of our goals to meet that. And you can see the dotted line there on the graph shows where we were going in that direction. So there was an executive order that Kate Brown passed in 2020 that directed state agencies to look into transportation land use planning and figure out some ways to address those emissions issues. And specifically, our emission from transportation is around 38% of what the overall emissions we see in the state of Oregon. So that was why transportation is such a big part of the project. So as you can see, with the changes that have been instituted so far, including CFAC, that put us much closer to our goal, which is the blue line there. So we're getting much closer to the goal of what the brown or bottom line there is. That's our goal line. So the CFAC and other changes are getting us more in line with our goals. So several projects will need to be implemented for the new rules, and they generally fall into 4 buckets. The first is parking, which includes parking reform and preparing for a future with more electric vehicles. Next is climate-friendly areas, which is planning for some areas to have higher density housing coupled with more active transportation facilities that allow people to get around without relying on a car. Next is climate-friendly transportation, which includes updates to the transportation system plan, implementing a preferred scenario plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation, and updating bike parking requirements. Finally, there's compact development, which includes updating the land use code to implement pedestrian-friendly and compact development standards. And we'll be focusing on the parking reform portion of the project this evening. So parking reform are the first components of the CFAC rule changes to go into effect. And they are the rules that impact how or even if cities will require minimum off-street parking for development and redevelopments of properties. So for some background, prior to the implementation of CFAC, the City of Eugene's land use code would require a specific number of off-street parking spaces for the development and redevelopment of properties based on specific ratios for use type and size of the use. We already had parking exempt areas in the code, like downtown and the West University areas, but in the remainder of the town, minimum off-street parking requirements were strictly enforced, which limited how owners developed their properties and posed an obstacle for many developments. So why was parking included in the state's rule changes? First off, parking minimums make housing more expensive. It costs a lot to build parking spaces, and that cost usually ends up raising tenants' rents. During our ongoing housing supply and affordability crisis, it's important to look into removing barriers to increase the supply of housing, and mandated parking is one of those barriers. For instance, the average cost per new surface parking space is around $5,000. The typical cost that renters pay for garage parking is around $142 per month, which leads to an additional 17% of the dwelling unit's rent that is attributed to parking. And we're talking about garage parking here specifically. Another reason that the rules focus on parking is that surface parking takes up a lot of space that a property owner could choose to use for more housing or open space, including gardens, landscaping, and trees. Research has shown that after cities have made policy changes concerning parking minimums, developers invested in more mixed use and affordable housing projects as a result of the reduced costs from removing parking mandates. Additionally, having an abundance of available parking actually incentivizes driving, even when we could walk, bike, or take the bus. So here's a rundown of the timeline for the required parking reform actions. I want to clarify right off the bat that these changes impact whether the city can require off-street parking, and regardless of the reforms that the city makes, property owners will still be able to build off-street parking if they choose to, or if financing or other market demands require them to build the parking. The first changes kicked in automatically at the end of last year, and it removed or reduced some parking requirements. The next change is EV charging capacity rules, which took effect at the end of March. And then by the end of this year, the city is required to adopt a land use code amendment that implements the rest of the parking reform by choosing one of 3 options. And we'll get into those options more later. So as of January 1st, 2023, and this is something that is in effect currently. So the biggest change is that the city can no longer require off-street parking for any property located within a half mile of a frequent transit corridor. Those corridors are defined by the state as transit lines that have 4 or more stops per hour at peak times. And the map there is difficult to see in a PowerPoint presentation, but we do have a better version of the map on the city's project website that allows you to zoom all the way down to a tax lot by tax lot basis, so you can see which lots are specifically included in those exempt areas or not. And so additionally, the city is limited to requiring no more than 1 parking space per residential unit when there are 2 or more dwellings on a single lot. And this has to do with middle housing or multi-unit projects. And it's typically in line with what the city already has for our parking requirements. However, in addition to these 2 changes, as of January 1st, 2023, the state designated a list of other specific uses that are exempt from parking requirements. And those include facilities and homes for people with disabilities, childcare facilities, affordable housing developments, and dwelling units smaller than 750 square feet. So no matter what option the city chooses going forward, those uses that are close to transit lines, and for these specific uses, the city can no longer require off-street parking for any of these going forward. But a reminder, it's still up to the developers and property owners to decide if they want to build parking. And as of today, while there has been a lot of interest and a lot of discussions with building permits coming in, nobody has actually taken advantage of the exemption to not provide parking. So it's still those market demands, financing demands that are driving the decision on whether to build parking or not. So as of April 1st, 2023, these are the EV charging rules that went into effect. So for a little context, starting last summer in July, the state building code changed to require 20% of all new parking spaces built in commercial and multi-unit residential developments to be served by EV charging conduit. It's not charging stations, it's just the pipes or the tubes that are built under the parking lot themselves that will allow for the expansion to run the cables and eventually have EV charging stations. What CFAC did is it increased that 20% requirement that was in the building code to 40% of all off-street vehicle parking spaces for multi-unit and mixed use with a multi-unit component development. So this is, if anybody is now coming in for a multi-unit, which is 5 or more dwelling unit developments, any parking spaces they build, 40% of those parking spaces have to have that conduit laid so that it'll allow for an easier transition when there's more electric vehicles in the market. And this change went into effect automatically as of April 1st, but we're also going to include it in the land use code amendment that is due by the end of this year. And so here is a little bit of summary about what options we have by the end of this year. And the city may choose between 3 different options. Option 1 is to remove all minimum off-street parking requirements citywide. And so in addition to those transit corridors and those specific uses, this would apply to the rest of the city. So it's the most straightforward option, and the same rules would apply for the entire city. The option would allow for property owners and developers to decide whether to build parking based on market needs or other demands, or to utilize that space with other uses like gardens, trees, bike parking, or other amenities. It also allows the city to explore other parking reforms that would mitigate potential issues caused by the developments that don't provide parking, such as more neighborhood residential permits, or looking into how to provide more ADA accessible parking if parking does go away for certain developments. Options 2A and 2B have another list of specific regulations that we have to pass if we choose either one of those options. And the options also would entail having different parking rules for different areas of the city. The city would have to reassess transit lines on an annual basis and modify the code based on changes to transit routes. And the specifics are pretty complicated, so we can get into more details. We'll do a quick summary in the next slide. But if you have specific questions about options 2A or 2B, we can get into what those options look like during the question time. So this is just a brief summary of what the 2 different options entail. Option 2A is termed the fair parking policy approach, and it involves choosing 2 of 5 different policies. The first 2 policies relate to unbundling, and this is a concept that it would have the city require landlords or people who lease commercial tenant space to charge extra for the parking space in addition to either the dwelling unit or the commercial space. So that would be a requirement that the city would have to implement by making changes to the residential rental code, and then also putting changes into the land use code. Other requirement or other options for this approach would include a new tax on commercial parking lot revenue, an employee commute benefit for employers that have 50 or more employees. They would have to provide a benefit to employees who choose to commute other ways and don't use the required off-street parking or provided off-street parking. And then the final one is to limit multi-unit developments to no more than 1/2 parking space per unit. And right now in the code, we require 1 parking space per unit. So this would be cutting our requirements in half. Option 2B is termed the reduced regulation management approach, and it lists 14 specific policies that the city would have to comply with. And this has to do with removing minimum parking requirements for a list of specific uses and in specific areas of town. And then we do have one choice for the 14th policy is to either designate an on-street parking district where we regulate parking with meters or permits, or unbundle parking for multi-unit citywide. All right, so that's the end of my presentation. We can get to any questions we have at this point before we talk a little bit more about next steps and where the project goes from here.
Now, Reed, is your main goal, what is your main goal in coming to us?
We are in public engagement at this point, so we are trying to present information to the public and we're trying to get feedback on what people think is the preferred option for the city going forward. We've been in public engagement for probably about the last month and a half. We've done stakeholder interviews. We've done a number of focus groups. We had a survey that unfortunately just closed on Monday, so that's not able to go forward to answer anymore, but we did get about 437 response. So yeah, we're still just kind of in that reaching out to the public, informing, and then hoping to answer questions if there's any questions about the project, because parking rules can be kind of confusing. And then once people have that information, asking to be a part of the public hearing process that's upcoming. We're going to be going to the Planning Commission in June. They will eventually be making recommendations, and then we'll be going to the City Council in fall. And then they have those the decision point basically is which option do we want to pursue with the rest of the parking reform.
And the city council is the decision.
Yeah, they are the ultimate decision makers.
And I can jump in here real quick. So we've talked about this in the past, but you as ATC are advisory to staff. You're not advisory to any of the elected bodies like planning commission or city council. So in a lot of ways, this right now is your opportunity to make your recommendation to Reed as staff, and then he can bring what he hears as the staff report to the elected officials. So this is kind of the chance for the ATC to be like, this is what we think about this situation, and this is what we would recommend if we were the ones, who got to make the choice. So
Hi, I like you've totally convinced me as to why like parking minimums are bad, making housing more costly and those things. So I'm wondering, like, what are the benefits of not adopting no parking minimums throughout the entire city of Eugene? Like,
So the main concern that people have when they hear that parking requirements will go away is that developers will decide to build something and not provide parking. And if developers do that, it might bring more traffic to an area. So there's going to be more people parking on the street. That's usually the main one that people come up with. There's kind of a side issue that comes from the building code, which it only requires 88 parking spaces if you're building parking on your property already. So there's a situation where the building code actually doesn't allow cities to require any more than 1 ADA space if they're not providing any parking. So there is a little bit of carve out where we can provide 1 ADA space. But if that happens on a lot of developments through town, we might have a situation where ADA parking is reduced citywide if a lot of developers decide to not build parking, because typically ADA spaces are built on a ratio of how much parking you're building already. So those are the two main issues we've seen, negatives, and then it's a lot of just fear that there's going to be dense infill and no parking is going to be provided, and so yeah, there's going to be more parking on streets.
okay, interesting. Well, if this is our time to say our 2 cents, I think parking minimums should go away citywide. And I also think that you have some great tactics on your bundles that you could use in other parts of the city, even if you don't go with 2A or 2B. So thanks for coming and talking to us.
Yeah, that is a great point. Like, that's a nice thing about option 1 is we're removing minimums, but then we can start looking at other strategies for mitigating those potential negative effects of not requiring parking. And we're hoping that this building code will change so that we can require ADA spaces independent of the parking spaces themselves.
Yeah.
But
Right.
that's on a state level thing. And it can be
Oh.
slow to make changes. It would have been nice if they had packaged it together with the CFAC thing, but they kind of looked into it and I guess it didn't make sense based on their timelines. But yeah, there's they drafted update to CFAC, that's a temporary rule change that just went into effect 2 weeks ago. And they are looking into doing some permanent changes by the year end. So they're looking into potentially tweaking some of the rules, and that might be one of the ones that they look into.
Cool. So I just want to say this is the discussion and question time. And then if we want after we're done with this portion, if we could test for consensus about some kind of a motion, or right now we're doing individual comments that are getting recorded. But you might think about, is there a motion you want to bring to the group?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, thanks. I totally agree that like parking minimums are not a great thing. And I really like that you're thinking about the pushback from the public. Because I think that particularly parking minimums are a very like misunderstood thing where people are just concerned there's not gonna be parking at all when you do that. So it's really like great to hear that there's gonna be other things to counter that. And I wonder if you've engaged at all with the housing zoning changes at all, because this feels like a similar issue of like there was a lot of fear mongering around that issue a couple years ago, and the public misunderstanding of that, sort of not making it easy for that to be like a, hey, this is actually probably going to lower rents and some of those issues.
And yeah, your middle housing, I'm assuming is, and middle housing had some components where it did exempt parking and allowed for some more, like you could get credits for on-street parking if it was available and things like that. This definitely expands on that. So what we've been trying to do is we've got a 6-month timeline extension to do public engagement, because originally we were supposed to have this code amendment done by June, which would have no time to get into the community. So we've had really condensed just like 3 months of outreach here, where we've been reaching out to neighborhood groups, we're reaching out to different rental organizations, different business owners, developers. We're trying to get a real cross section of the community. We had an ADA focus group earlier last week, actually. So that's where we're trying to reach out to those historically marginalized community members that aren't always brought into the land use and planning process. We had a focus group for BIPOC and LGBTQ plus people that was well attended. So we got to have a conversations about that. And that's all we can really do is just take every opportunity to reach out, to come to committees like this and present information, and hope that we can dispel any sort of misunderstandings, and that people will understand what we're actually doing going forward. So that's what we're doing right now, trying to get at everybody.
Oh, great. And then one group, I don't know if you engaged, but I would recommend is the renters union.
Yes.
Okay.
I wonder if we want to just like go down the table and like kind of get around, because it does seem like.
the lights on so you can.
Oh, sure, yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Connie. Yeah, Julie.
Okay, I just have two sort of commenty, questiony things. Is one, I would really like to see us do something about increasing ADA parking and removing, parking. I love no parking. I would like to get all the cars off the street except ADA. Would be my preference. Is there any possibility of doing outreach to lenders? Because that's where, from having done a project myself, that was where the sort of, the rubber hits the road when your lender says you have to have, and it seems like it's an unusual thing for the city to do, but has there been any outreach to lending institutions? I realize a lot of them are not local, but a lot of projects are locally financed. We do have some local banks and they are locally financed. And it seems like putting together some kind of a presentation for the lending community would be a really good idea about, get rid of the fear and move forward. So that's fine. 2 cents.
You have,
Where are we going around?
Only if you have a comment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So I guess I kind of gleaned from some head nodding and some of the comments already. I'm representing somewhat of a minority opinion here. I'm a little bit more ironically, I'm typically the progressive and Democrat, so I'm feeling like a conservative in this group. Because my perspective is based on my life experience. So I remember visiting my brother in Wrigleytown in Chicago in the late 90s and having to spend about 25 or 30 minutes trying to find parking to get to his house.
circling box, going further and further, right? That was a very foreign concept from a small town Oregon kid, and it's certainly even to this day a foreign concept for me in my neighborhood in Eugene. I understand that the city's push, the state's push, we have a housing crisis, so this is about cost per square foot on lots in a big way. From my understanding, there's also the climate aspect to it, but I mean, I think that a huge push really is it's about getting developers incentivized to build at a lower cost. And of course, that trickles down to the people who might live there, and that's generally a good thing. But some concerns I have is living in my neighborhood are yes, ultimately that fear of Wrigleytown. But even before that, it's how can these things go into place when we don't even have the infrastructure for that walkable community that these ordinances and regulations are trying to incentivize, this half mile from transportation corridors and these things that we even have now. We can't even, we can't do upkeep on our sidewalks and bike lanes. I mean, I submitted 6, and I know I'm one of those guys, neighbors, 6 code complaints on 29th Avenue this week because I walk it between Amazon Parkway and Lincoln every day, north side, south side, every day. And it's awful. There's bikes in the sidewalks. There's electric bikes in the sidewalks where pedestrians and kids are trying to walk. And so I find it a little bit irresponsible of the state and city to suggest that we need to go that direction when we don't even have the infrastructure to promote the safe walking and biking that, you know, city that we want. So it's almost like we're kind of suggesting, yeah, this is a great move. And theoretically, I mean, I totally agree. I walk and bike all the time. I carbon footprint. I mean, I'm a naturalist. I get all that, and I want less auto traffic, but I feel like that you know, we're trying to implement one thing without even having the other. Even now, even before this is implemented, we have problems with our infrastructure. So this idea that it's going to make everyone, you know, want to walk and bike, I struggle with supporting that. I kind of feel like it needs to be like both and in parallel, and you know, where's the cities and the states kind of money, I guess, behind that, or how can we fund that in parallel? So those are some of my concerns there. You know, I've got young kids at home. My mom's 88. She lives on our property. I worry about you. She drives a lot. She does walk a lot too in the neighborhood, but I think she drives because, especially at nighttime and other times where it's just not safe and it's not a good time to be on the sidewalks for her. So I don't know. Those are just some of my honest concerns about this. I'm not against, you know, what the city's trying to do and the state's trying to do in this. So I guess my question ultimately, the presentation would be, what's the minimum that the city has to do in this regard? So we've heard some suggestions here that we should just do away with minimums altogether. What's the most that we can keep of the status quo?
So if you remember that transit corridor map that has all the shaded lots, we can't require parking going forward for any lot that's within a half mile of the transit corridor. So that is nothing we get a say in. That's a change that automatically went in January 1st. We don't get to say one way or another.
That was the state, right? Just to
Yeah,
clarify?
state. All of this so far has been the state. The city has taken no decision going forward. What we're trying to do here, the decision point we have is which option we want to pursue for the rest of it. But the changes that went into effect already are mandatory, and we can't change them. We could go more, getting rid of more parking at this point if we want to, but we have to at least get rid of parking close to transit lines and for those listed specific uses. Regardless of what we do option wise going forward, those are going to stay exempt from parking requirements. The choice that we have are for those areas that are outside of the transit corridors and for those uses that don't meet those specific policies. And then here is a little summary of the two choices that we have. If we decide to not remove parking citywide, then we either have to pick those specific 2 out of 5 policies or comply with all 14 policies in option 2A or 2B. So that's the one choice point we have is how we handle the areas that are outside of the transit corridors and for those other uses.
One more.
You know
comment
what,
then.
Jerry, I do want to make sure everybody gets a chance, so could you finish
I
up?
will finish up very
Okay.
quickly. In that case, and now that I understand that better, I would actually vote for doing away with all minimums. And the reason is, now that I understand it, that pretty much the entire city core is affected by that new law, half mile from a transit corridor.
Mhm.
And what I would then be concerned about is it's really an equity issue. I
Yeah.
don't find it equitable that the city core is gonna have, you know, and then pretty much what we're talking about ultimately where I see it is mostly the south and the southeast sides of the city, which are most affluent sides of the city. So those folks are gonna be able to enjoy plenty of, you know, status quo on-street parking, while the folks in the downtown core, who often, many of whom are there to, because they want walkability and density, are gonna have to kind of have those, some of those negative consequences. So I would actually be in line with folks based on that. Thank you for the clarification.
And originally, the state was just going to only provide the option of, not really an option, they were going to mandate removing parking minimums, but there was pushback from some municipalities that wanted more options. So they came up with 2A, gives you kind of some ways to get at the pricing of parking spaces. The whole concept of unbundling statistically shows that over time, it will lower rent costs for people that don't have a car. Because right now, if you don't have a car, you're paying for all your neighbors that do have a car. The concern with unbundling, if the city requires it for, and it's for not just new development, it's existing development as well. So if the city does have to require unbundling, there's concern that, okay, some landlords are probably just going to charge extra for parking. They're not going to give any sort of price break to people that are giving up that parking included. Is just going to kind of be an add-on service now. So there's been concerns about that and what the short-term impact might be on renters specifically if we do go forward with the unbundling options. And then as far as 2B with the 14 policies, that's their idea is that option 1 light, because there's so many different uses or different development types that are listed in that it really would give developers an ability to get around parking requirements in almost every circumstance that they want to. Like if you were to go for the Oregon residential reach code certification, you wouldn't have to provide parking. If you did the LEED certification, you wouldn't have to provide parking. For studio and 1-bedroom apartments, there you wouldn't have to provide parking. For bars and taverns, for schools, things like that. They just hit so many different uses. We're basically at the point where we're not requiring parking for most developments, but it does allow us to still provide it for some uses within the rural framework. But yeah, that is the main thing about option 1. It is the most equitable, treats every area of town the same. It hopefully provides more diversity of housing in all areas of town, because like with middle housing right now, you can see cottage clusters, you can see fourplexes going in anywhere, because that's not dependent on only R2 zoning like it used to be. It's R1 zoning now. You can see those more dense developments. So if those could go in all over the city. So this would just provide the same rules for everybody and provide that same flexibility. That being said, we're all concerned that going too fast with removing parking before we can get to the other portions of the climate friendly project, like those compact developments, the transportation system overhaul. A big portion of that is fixing sidewalk infrastructure, because we've heard that feedback too, that even close to transit corridors, if you have mobility issues, that might not be enough for you because you might not have good sidewalks to get to and from your house or to the businesses that you need to go to. So thanks for the feedback.
Probably about a minute for anybody else who wants to make a comment.
I would support option 1 too, for all the reasons everybody else has said, plus the fact that the others just seem like such a tremendous sink of staff time. It's like, holy, you're gonna be chasing every landlord around. You're gonna, every time they change a transit route, we're gonna have new, that's crazy. Let's use staff time for important stuff.
Yeah, and I wanted to add also that I would be in favor of option 1. I did have a clarifying question, though. These 14 policies, are those also then immediately in effect for option 1, or are they just not needed?
They're not needed. If we remove parking requirements citywide, then those are just specific things that we could require parking for anyway. So it would just be the ones you did. Option 1 is very simple. We're basically crossing out parts of the code. There's one thing I didn't cover because it's regardless of going into, but for large parking lots that are being built, so over a half acre in size, there's also requirement to build more tree canopy or solar charging stations and things like that. But that's just an automatic change that goes into effect by the end of the year.
I have a, you done? Yes, I had a question about, is there any indication of how the city council is leaning? Has there been any opportunity to hear from them?
We presented, we did an overall CPAC presentation when it was passed, which was August of last year, and then we went back with a parking specific presentation to city council. Council frankly was not happy with any of the options. They didn't like the idea of being forced to remove parking requirements. Asked questions like, what if we don't do anything? The code does speak to that. If we don't do anything, option 1 is the default. So what they wanted us to do was to get this 6-month extension so we could get community involvement and thoughts on preferred options. citywide.
Yeah, let's talk about it now.
Charlotte, two questions for you. One is, how does this link or not link to transportation infrastructure, going back to Jerry's point about a half mile? And you said something about frequent transit routes, so 4 times an hour. Well, I'd like to see it 8 times an hour. I'd like to see transit like in Europe. So how does it, and we're a mid-sized city and that's a little tricky. So that's question 1. And then second question is, do any of these options apply to both retail and commercial? Or does that go into the compact development bucket that we talked about?
So for retail and commercial have the same, well, not the same, but it's on the same use table. If you do a shop, you calculate how much square footage for that shop based on a table, and you would be required to provide off-street parking for that use. Now, if you happen to be located near the transit corridor, we can't provide parking going forward. Option 2B expands those lists of uses, even if you're outside of a transit corridor, for like small businesses, if you have less than 3,000 square feet of business, or if fewer than 10 employees, that's one of the uses that you're specifically exempt from parking. Expansions by less than 30% of your footprint would be exempt from parking. So option 2B gets to a lot more of those exemptions. But yeah, option 1 would just remove it for every use, whether it be residential, commercial, industrial. The city would not require parking. It would be up to that developer to decide what they build. As far as your first question about transit, we're working with LTD on this project. They are the ones that provided the information on which transit lines met the state definition. However, if we choose an option that does not remove it citywide, we're going to be having to go back year by year and recheck on the transit and see where those frequent lines are now. But then the next portion, where I guess it's 2 portions of the project down, when it's the transportation planning update, that is going to be just Springfield, Eugene, LTD, all together to really work on bolstering our infrastructure for transit. And it's also going to be sidewalk infrastructure. So it's just an overall major transportation planning update to really go in that direction of having the system in place so that people can not have vehicles and can commute with transit lines and bikes easier going forward.
And what's the timeline for that?
That is, I believe the deadline for that is it's either 2026, where there's first changes, the scenario planning goes into effect, and then the major transportation is 2029.
One last question on option A, do you have it documented somewhere where you can take a look at all of the policies that would go into effect under that option?
Yeah, I mean, it lists in there, it's not like really broke out, but there's 1 is unbundling for multi-unit residential, 2 is unbundling for commercial developments, 3 is the employee commute benefit, 4 is the tax on the parking lot revenue, and 5 is the maximum a half parking space per unit for multi-unit developments. So we have to choose 2 of those if we go for that option.
So we've got a lot of individual comments recorded, and we have 5 minutes. We don't want to rush anything, but does anybody want to propose anything, or?
I just had one quick question, and then I'll make a motion that we advise staff to support option 1. But anyway, my quick question is, there isn't any link between parking and system development charges, is there? I mean, like somebody gets a break on system development charges if they provide less parking. Would that screw with any of that stuff?
I don't believe so. I know that you have to pay for, when you build impermeable surfaces,
Right.
you have to pay more in SDCs. So building parking would tend to up your SDCs. It depends on what you would use that space for. Alternatively, if it's more stormwater, more landscape, and more trees and things like that, yeah, then I don't think that that would increase it. If anything, it would
Cost us a lot of SDC revenue.
So a system development charge is like a fee that developers have to make and it goes into the city's budget. So
It's
it's
often
good for
used
the
for,
city.
it's often used for good transportation projects.
Yeah, we use it for a lot of really important things, so it's, but it is, can be cost prohibitive, yeah, for developers.
So did you want to make
Yeah, so I'll move that, that we advise staff to go with option one. The removing minimum citywide.
Could I add to that? I don't know
Somebody
if
has to
that
second
works.
it first, and then you can amend it.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Could I amend that we also recommend staff to consider enacting some of the 5 policies in addition? Not requiring, but considering doing that?
Some of the what?
The 5 policies, I like their policies,
Oh.
like the unbundling and the employee commute benefit and the tax on parking lot revenue. But I also don't have to if people would not want to approve that.
Well, just a point of clarification, I was assuming that those 5 policies would also be included in option A1. No.
Well, no, because we're not requiring parking citywide. That is, if we choose to retain parking mandates, we have to choose either option 2A or 2B for the land use code amendment.
Is there a slide for one?
One is,
So,
it was just on that table and it's just remove parking minimum citywide.
That's,
I kind of think we should keep it clean and just say 1, 2, or 3. I mean, 1,
Okay,
2, or 2.
sure.
And
Can
but
we have a
people,
second motion, Clarissa?
If people want to keep it clean, I'm happy to do that.
I mean, yeah, I don't want to speak for the group, but I'm happy to second the
Okay.
option to enact
I'll make mine a motion
additional
then.
policies.
So
now I-
friendly amendment to the emotion. to the
Or a
motion.
friendly amendment.
I'm okay with that. We're just asking to think about it, you know.
Is there any discussion? We only have a few minutes here, so let's see if we can get.
This is just a quick point.
Yeah.
I wonder what public awareness is around the state law change as it exists now. Frankly, I was taken aback by like, oh my God, that's my neighborhood, like that. Because in middle housing, I followed it very closely. I know the council voted against, in fact, a lot of the minimum parking that was on regulations or amendments that were on the table. They only enacted one, which I think was for affordable, that was deemed affordable housing, to have no to have no off-street parking. But this is kind of revolutionary. I mean, this takes that all, I mean, council had all kinds of concerns based on public input. This is revolutionary in a sense, and it took me by surprise. I wonder, and if awareness is low, then this is gonna really inflame people. So I wonder if, it would be wise of the city, and I would advise the city to like start with making people aware of just what's going on now. Because if the sense is that this is that the downtown core, I mean, there's no choice. We're not even voting on that. I mean, it's a huge part of the city. It looked like it went from about 24th to I don't know, Oakway and even.
Yeah, and the only reason it doesn't go further out Covert is because there's 2 separate transit lines that diverge at one point. So if they like mirrored themselves like the River Road, Santa Clara area does, it would go much further out the Covert Road area.
Because there might be a lot of people that would be up in arms. They say, oh, no, we can't do that. Like, oh,
That's kind of part of our-
actually, it's already done, right? It's already, you don't even have a choice. It's already done.
Yeah, we've reached out to the neighborhood groups. We had a public Zoom info session that we tried to get as many people to come. We've had press releases, information on the website. That's what the survey was trying to get at too. Yeah, in the short time frame we have, we've really done everything we can to get the message out to people. I think that it's just a challenge because I know even with middle housing, they had 2 years to work on that project. And there were still a lot of people that hadn't heard what was going on. and were blown away. So, yeah, this is a much shorter condensed timeline. So yeah, it would be nice if we could get information out to everybody a little better, but mailers are very expensive and there's no specific budget from the state for the parking portion. There are some funds for the climate friendly area studies and the major transportation overhaul and things like that, but the parking itself, they basically gave us very few choices and a very short timeline on getting it implemented. And yeah, that's what we're working on.
Okay, we're at time. So does somebody want to restate the motion for us?
I guess the motion is to advise staff that we support option one. And we encourage them to look at the additional factors that are mentioned in 2A and 2B to
Make it even more
to promote
difficult.
active transportation. Yeah,
But also to promote cheaper housing
Yeah.
costs through unbundling.
to build a climate friendly and equitable community.
Yes. So we have a second.
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor? Andrea's, okay,
She's
it
waving at us.
passes. Thank you very much for coming and spending your time and
Yeah,
answering our
thank you.
questions.
you.
We have a break, 5 minutes.
You know, if we didn't do any outreach at all and just went ahead and did it, because development happens kind of slowly, no one would ever know. That's my other strategy.
Well, that's-
That would be a lot easier.
And that's where Springfield's traditionally been done. 5 minutes, people can put it in. Do stuff, you know? They don't spend months and months talking
That was a
about
great
it.
discussion here. I'm gonna go back to the Zoom and take notes. So I can send you.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, 'cause
Okay.
we're putting together
What's
a
that?
summary of.
Feedback, just like to learn about this.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Claiming for a big delay of the whole. Well, you know. I know, so like the fact that-
Line has 4 almost,
Okay.
half a mile an hour, 3.5 miles an hour.
No, yeah, totally.
That's a
Yeah,
huge
wow.
Yeah, the whole Watford district.
At least 4,000,
Yeah, I mean,
per hour.
it's-
And just 1 hour
I
today.
guess, I guess in certain respects, I was more of a. You know,
Yeah.
it's sort of like, you know, it's a state, you know, they're like, the city of Eugene can't be more different about this. Continue to run over.
It's to your point. It's the question of what are the consequences. But thinking what, you know, it's like, there's a lot of times you're saying, good, you know, good intentions, you know. No big take on coming. Because there will be, I mean, you know, and that's, you know, it's gonna put more pressure on the non, on the alternative transportation.
Yeah.
which-
Yeah.
I mean, like. last month there, there's-
Well, no, but that's the whole thing. Neighborhoods paradigm. They're built houses built in 46, 47. They're at the end of their lifespan, so it will cut down. I mean,
That is good. I mean, there's still, as long as the market is full of people that have 2 cars. Developers don't have a lot of-
Yeah, but if you're developing, say you got an old apartment complex, half parking, and then also just tear it down. And not have to put this much parking and build more in the unit, right? And can more better cost effective for you, it's good, except you're renting more spaces.
Well, that's what I think about having that neighborhood.
Went and saw the birds.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
I didn't get to see them until last night, though.
Oh.
I tried to go like between that start and end time, and it was a really cool night. I recorded like.
Yeah, raining the whole, it's pretty magical.
Yeah.
Right.
See them all the birthday.
Yeah, we went a couple times. Yeah, I was just making excuses to go. I learned that Hey Neighbor, that's pizza place over there, has $5 drinks. And so that was a good thing to learn. Yeah, my partner really likes Prince Buckner, so usually we'll go and get an ice cream and then go watch the bird. It's great. What else have you been up to besides birding and biking around?
Not just $10.
Well, do you want nice sidewalks in your neighborhood?
I took a yoga class in the park this weekend.
$3.
Working on finishing my certification. for that.
Oh, nice.
ATC coming at you. Okay. I hope you had a very nice break, and now we're moving on to an e-scooter update. I learned this from my teachers at the Y, they just keep talking when everybody's visiting. At our retreat, I wanted to note that the e-scooter project came in the 7th out of 7th in terms of kind of how important we thought it was or how much we wanted to engage in it. However, it's here now. And there've been a lot of comments, and it's really pertinent to what's going on right now. And so there've been comments in the community that we've been aware of. And so, yeah, we also, I think there's this feeling from me anyway, and maybe from the group that it's a pilot. And I wanted to have a fair opportunity, a fair chance for the year, you know, and so right now it's being like, you know, I think bashed a little bit, but I'm not sure. So we wanted to get an update from the city about how's it, what are you hearing? How successful is it in terms of rides and that kind of thing?
Okay, this is, so I'm eating popcorn. 1 second. Okay. This is really good timing for us to give you this update because we have just, well, we as in Cascadia Mobility mostly, and the city just being like, yeah, do what you need to do, have decided to kind of institute some changes into the e-scooter program because it's been 1 month. So in the first month, we have had a lot of scooter rides, like way more than we were expecting. In fact, I think it surpassed the projections by 50%, which means we had double the amount of rides we were expecting. So what that means is that demand is outweighing supply by a lot, which is really exciting because basically from a ridership perspective, it's going really well. Let me pull up what I have as far as some of the like stats. So the program launched with a service area that included the entire Eugene city limits. So basically the UGB was the service area. If you got out of the UGB, the scooter dies. That's like really big. The UGB is huge and it's way bigger than the Peace Health Rides bike share service area. In the first month of operation, so we launched March 31st. Yes.
Can I just say, do they die in Springfield too? I heard somebody asking that. Okay.
They die in Springfield.
No, well, somebody said they saw an e-scooter in Springfield and they were wondering how they got.
Yeah, I guess that person theoretically could have pushed it with their foot. Like it's not like it locks up, it just the motor dies. So, you know, or they could have driven it over there. There's still a lot of ways scooters can get around places. Okay, so it's been 1 month. On average, there have been about 310 scooters distributed throughout the city. 21,589 trips were made in 1 month, which is like really a lot.
Say that number again.
21,589 trips. That means the average daily use rate of a single scooter was 2.5 uses for one scooter. And that's the average. We had some days where a single scooter was being used 4 to 5 times. So the scooters are getting a lot of use. The vast majority, like 80 to 90% of the trips were happening in the urban core. So that's like the Peace Health Ride service area. That's where the vast majority of scooter trips were happening as well. So some of the challenges we've experienced in the first month, the number of trips completed has exceeded the supply. So we have a demand problem. This has placed pretty intense pressure on Cascadia Mobility to service the e-scooter program. And I think that's where a lot of the community concerns are coming from, is like, this scooter has been here for 6 days. No one's come to move it. It's out of battery. It's just sitting here. And that's because they've been used so much, and Cascadia Mobility is understaffed and they just can't keep up with it because it's so successful. Also, improper scooter parking is occurring, and when people report it, Cascadia Mobility can't get to it in time because they're so understaffed. So what are we going to do about it? We're basically instituting this new thing called right sizing the service area. The UGB is essentially just, it's too big. Like Cascadia Mobility can't handle it. They're spending over 50% of their time tracking down 5% of the scooters that are outside of that service area. And it is a pilot program. So that's the nice thing, is we're like, okay, we're adjusting. So I'll bring this over here. And let me share the screen with the Zoom folks real quick so they can see it too.
Remind me, are these solar charged?
They are a plug-in. Yeah, and so that depends on which, like, if they're being charged in a facility that's solar powered, then they're solar powered.
Is Cascadia Mobility charging them?
Cascadia Mobility is charging.
They're the ones charging them?
So you'll see new area phase 1. This is basically starting, I think, today. This is the new area.
Oh,
If you ride it out of that boundary, the motor will die. That's on the app. So, and it's gonna be the first thing when you pull it up to try and get a scooter, it's gonna say like new service area to educate users. The idea is to, once Cascadia Mobility gets their feet under them a little bit, to extend out into West Eugene along the Fern Ridge Path and up north into the like Oakway Center, kind of Coburg Road area, and then if that is, going well and Cascadia Mobility is feeling like they can handle it, then we could extend out into the main area of Bethel and River Road.
Okay, can you tell us the boundaries of this new reduced area?
yeah, what
Or
is
can
West
you
Eugene
make that
stuff?
map bigger so we can see them ourselves?
It's, I believe this is essentially the Peace Health Rides service area for the most part, with maybe a few.
It's quite a bit bigger than or a little bit bigger than.
Yeah, actually, I think you're right. It's a little bit bigger, like it can get you up to Hendricks Park and further south.
The Chambers on the west is farther than Peace Health goes to.
Okay. Oh, it does go further north than the Peace Health Rides as well. So in addition to this, in order to respond to the parking concerns, also so right now as it exists, campus and downtown Eugene are called parking restricted zones, meaning you can only park in a hub. They're considering adding that into some additional areas of the town. I don't know where those are yet, but it's something that they're thinking about. And they're also thinking about creating more parking hubs where you get that $1 rebate. So the more and more parking hubs we have around, the more and more people can park in those instead of parking all over the place, which has been a concern we've been hearing from community members.
I think we're adding about 40 additional new spots.
40 additional new spots.
New
Yeah,
parking hubs, yeah.
yeah, which is a lot of new spots to
Parking
add.
hubs.
Yeah,
Sort
in
of
that
within
new
the
area.
Painted area.
Mhm.
So it'll be easier for them not to have to go track them down.
And it kind of is a twofold solution. It helps Cascadia Mobility with their operations because the scooters are kind of in predictable places. And then it helps the community with having less issues with scooters being parked in random spots that may or may not be convenient for people, maybe blocking access, maybe just unsightly or whatever people are concerned about. I'm wondering if there's anything else that I want to share.
Can I share something else I thought it's really cool?
Sure.
During this past month, Cascadia Mobility Peace Health bike ridership has actually gone up by 15%. So by having these scooters, by having this like more reliable, dependable opportunity and options, people are getting into this like shared mobility. So we're actually seeing increased ridership across the platform.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Claire. So that was something I really wanted to mention too. The scooters have contributed to this transportation ecosystem, right? Where it's like, now you're going to go somewhere and you're like, well, I'll walk there and then I could grab a scooter and then later I could get a bike, and it kind of creates this sort of flexibility in your mind. And I think that's really boosted, like the amount of people who are just using micromobility has gone up for both bike share and scooters. So there was some concern that the scooter share would decrease, it would like take bike riders, but it's done the opposite. It's like added bike riders. So that's been really cool and exciting to see. And I think a really positive outcome of the e-scooter so far. So I have, because if we do have time, I have your questions from the retreat that were put on the e-scooter.
5 minutes. Does anybody have any burning questions before we do those questions
I
or
just had a
comments?
comment about
Let's do that. Yeah.
scooter charging, if that's one of the bigger like impacts on the like servicing of the scooters and for Cascadia in general. I know that in DC, some of the companies that had scooters there would also rely on networks of just like independent people who could sign up to be a scooter charger, and then they would take the scooter and charge it and put it back in the street. And there was some sort of incentive around being in that position. Yeah.
Mhm, I have heard of that too, so
Mhm.
I'll get that in the
So
notes
just a
and
recommendation.
yeah, if you all have recommendations from an operations perspective, I can basically like record them and then share them with Cascadia Mobility. There were other comments, yeah.
I was just wondering, some of those new hubs, can we put those on the street instead of on the sidewalk? Like, we're talking about parking, let's get rid of one parking spot and make it a hub.
Yes.
That would, so that would be really cool. I don't
We
know
love
if I'm like
parking
supposed to go on the record or not, but I do know that there's like an administrative process to remove a parking spot in a way that there isn't for just like taking some sort of sidewalk side zone that's not right of way. You can just do whatever you want. Like us as a city kind of, we have to get it approved, but we can kind of just put it where if you take a parking spot, it's a whole thing. So I
So
think.
cars are more important than people for the
Basically.
city, just saying.
Yeah, essentially, that's kind of how the rule, reads a little bit.
I mean, because basically the problem, a lot of the problems here is that people park them on the sidewalk because they think, okay, it belongs on the sidewalk, but it ends up blocking a ramp or somebody's driveway. But if we put it where it's supposed to, you're not supposed to ride it on the sidewalk, so why are you parking it on the sidewalk?
Yeah.
You know, park it on the bloody street.
Individuals are allowed to park them on the street, like that's not against the rule.
But if we make corrals, so that would be my suggestion. I know you can't comment on it, but if.
You
could
can
just-
include it though,
Yeah,
even if
include it,
it's an
yeah.
Yes.
issue.
Yeah, we can include
We'd
it.
like corrals on the
We
street.
can go through the administrative process.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that is a thing that we could do. It just would.
I
take
think that's a
time.
good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just curious if they're expecting the numbers to, like, how much they're expecting the numbers to drop off after sort of the novelty of the.
Yeah.
the thing.
I have no clue.
Okay.
And the students are a lot of students leave for the summer, so it'll be really interesting to see like what the ridership is like through the summer when there's a much less student population, but the weather's better. So I think that's why the pilot year, so we'll be able to sort of track ridership and
Can you
see
tell
what it's like.
Ages of riders or?
I don't think it asks
Okay.
for, well, you
You
have
have
to
to be
say
over
if you're at least
18,
yeah,
18, but I
yeah.
don't think it asks for actual age.
Well, I say kudos for them for being responsive, first month, look and see what's happening, how can we revise, that's really great.
Mhm, and I think some folks are gonna be disappointed, at the
Yeah.
new area, people who have been enjoying using it to get places. So I definitely feel for those people who
Yeah.
are like, shoot, I'm not in the area anymore, but hopefully, as it expands, it can get back to those individuals. So
So is there any outreach about that rationale?
about why the service area. has been
Change in the
increased.
service areas that people know?
I'm not sure.
Can't go out to Fred Meyer.
Yeah, I know. I'm not
Right.
sure actually how it's been communicated in the app exactly.
Well, yeah, it'd also be nice, I mean, because all these people say, oh, I can't use Peace South rides because I'm not in the zone, so it'd be nice if this would get them to the zone, so then they could,
Mhm.
they expand the range. of
I do know
Peace South
we've
rides, but
done-
I can see they're having to chase bikes or chase scooters all over.
Yeah, we have done a news release for this. The Scooters have been pretty hot in the media, so I am expecting the news release that was released yesterday to probably be picked up and reported on. So that will be one way that it'll get out to folks. And then, all the classic communications channels for 21st century, the radio and, the things that we use. So
How about
it's been great.
injuries? Have you heard of injuries?
We have not had reported a single injury yet
No.
in the first month. So that doesn't mean there hasn't been any.
Right.
There just haven't been any that have been severe enough to be reported. Yeah.
Did I recall that one of the guidelines of use for the scooters was wearing helmets?
Yeah, helmets are technically required by law.
Yeah.
It's,
There's no, that's interesting. So there's no way to like
Enforce
check
that.
that, and it would just have to be enforced by law enforcement. But
yeah,
I mean, my observation is like,
unenforced.
It's just the head.
Me and friends were scooters to the bar the other day. We all brought our helmets. We were wearing helmets.
I'm sure you are. Really.
Whoops.
All right, if there are any really juicy questions, I can't remember what they were, maybe you could, or if you've got one really quick that you think is really
Yeah.
pertinent.
No,
Okay,
none
let's
of these
move on.
are really that pertinent, so I think we
Can we
can.
make a motion? It's Justin, right?
Josh?
Josh,
Josh.
can we make a motion what Josh said? We'd like to see the hubs or whatever the parking areas in the street, not the sidewalk.
Sure.
You're not really advisory to Cascadia Mobility, I mean.
Oh,
The
Oh, I
city,
see.
The
yeah,
city's
it's kind of a
gonna-
partnership and the city does have some ability to sort of engage in that conversation. So you could advise us,
Yeah, we
and.
advise
Why don't you
you.
just write to Al Hongor?
There's I think that was a motion,
yeah, so I'll make a motion. Somebody said.
okay? I need discussion really quick.
All those in favor? Okay,
I'm abstaining.
abstain. Andrea says yes. All right.
Okay, let me, sorry.
No ethics in the Supreme Court, you do.
Are you also working for just-
It looks like in.
Much more
But I'm
ethical
part of
than
the city
this.
doing this.
Oh,
Okay, Michelle's in favor too.
Picking out.
Okay.
Oh, Michelle, hi, Michelle, sorry I didn't see you up there. Okay.
Charlotte motions, who seconded? Sorry, real quick. Josh.
Okay. All right, we're moving on to move huge, follow up. Response to last meeting's discussion, Willow. And while she's doing that, I'll just say, I had kind of missed, I don't know if you guys saw it, that Willow put all these great talking points and things attached along with the minutes for ATC. Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I posted
I
on
sent them
Facebook.
to- I
I'm
put
sure
them to
both
my
of my
neighbors.
followers
Yeah,
will.
So please comment.
Good. So if you missed it like I did, that's where it is, where she sent the minutes, no, the agenda.
Yeah, when I sent out the agenda, I think I
I
had
had all these things.
a bunch of stuff on there. I was like, oh, I know this is a lot, but you all asked for it in the last
Yeah.
meeting. You were like, I specifically want these things, so I put them in the email. But there is a
Mario
principle.
Kart.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
they were very quick to look at, you know.
That was great.
Yeah, there's a Sharo video where when the biker hits the Sharo, they get the like, and then they like turn into Mario. Yeah, I did a printable survey on there, so if anyone wants to print out survey copies, I did some talking points in that email, and then some social media copy. So if you do want to just copy and paste, and I attached some photos. So those were the things you asked me for at the last meeting, so they were in the email. You also asked me to bring our materials, so I brought a big stack of bookmarks over there, so I would encourage you to grab. Those are for you to like grab several so that you can give them out to people or take them, you know, to a place that you feel like would be useful for them to have. We're in our final push for engagement. So on the bookmark, it says, please submit comments by May 31st. That's when we're going to close down the process on May 31st. So we're getting really close, but I do think in a lot of ways, the deadline people in the world, this is their chance, right? Like they've got 2 weeks left. May 31st is coming up. So we expect the procrastinators of the world to give us their comments. Yeah, go ahead and review those talking points so that when you do hand out the Move Huge bookmarks, you can,
Thank you.
you can have those talking points. Social media stuff was sent. Yeah, I know not everybody's a social media person, so only if you're comfortable, but I do think like posting personally from your account is really helpful. So if there are folks who are comfortable posting from social media, putting that onto your account is great. Okay, you had.
Thank you, Willow, for responding to all that stuff we asked for.
Yes.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Very responsive.
You had concerns last time we talked about not accessing people who aren't already users of the active transportation system. So I wanted to just share a couple of things that my team has done to sort of respond to that. I'll admit that like we just don't have the bandwidth to really get outside of our original communications plan, but there were a few things that we adjusted. So we're having another open house, which I'll touch on again, I think at the end of this, but it's in Bethel at Willamette High School. And the point of this open house is to host it somewhere else in a different part of town that's more accessible to a different group of people. We sent out over 20,000 postcards to the Bethel neighborhood, the Train Song neighborhood, the Far West neighborhood, basically neighborhoods that didn't have neighborhood representation or neighborhood associations. So there are a couple neighborhoods in town that don't have an active neighborhood association. So there wasn't a way for us to contact them. So they got postcards. Every affordable housing complex in town got a postcard. Like every apartment got a postcard. And then everyone in the Bethel neighborhood got a postcard because we're having the open house in Bethel. Like Reed had mentioned, doing mailers is really expensive, but I talked to Rob and we really felt like this was an important way to like advance our equity, also reach people who aren't using the system, reach those neighborhoods that are traditionally really hard to reach. And postcard mailers are just really effective. Like people see them and they look at them and they read them and they often take action based on them. So we prioritize that with some of our funding. Also, the postcard is bilingual, so it's in English and Spanish. the English side invites people to the Bethel open house, and the Spanish side invites people to the Spanish do-it-yourself event that we're gonna have a table at, to come chat with us. So there's that. Also, our lovely interns went around and re-signed areas in town that aren't active transportation corridors. So basically, we identified a bunch of community parks around town and got signs into those parks, because people walk and bike to the parks, but a lot of people drive to the parks and they bring their kids or they bring their dogs. And so we thought this would be a really good way to get a sign into a place where we're legally allowed to put them, which is in our property, but still reach folks who aren't, necessarily walking or biking. We also did a radio ad about Move Huge on KRVM. So we were like, people will be in their cars listening to the radio, and then they'll hear about Move Huge. So we're like, that's another way that we can access folks who are driving. And then last thing we did is we sent an email blast out to business property managers. So there's kind of like 10 to 12 sort of big time property managers that own the Walmarts and the shopping districts and all these things. And so we sent the information to them to share with their tenants. So from a business perspective. So those are some of the things that our team tried to do in response to the please try and get to folks who aren't walking and biking.
Can I say something? I'm impressed, that is a great outreach. Especially
Thank
to
you.
people who aren't digitally connected, including the business people, and reaching out to people who are not necessarily users. I think that you've done a terrific job. I just have to speak up to that. Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to speak, but.
Help yourself.
Yeah.
To be self-inclusive.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I was really like, this is good feedback, and we need to try and do something, even if we can't redesign our engagement plan, there's a few things we can do.
I was gonna add that Catherine was at the Southeast Neighbors
Mhm.
meeting Tuesday, and she said that she'd been doing that around town, so that's getting out to the neighborhood associations as well.
Yep, yeah, Catherine's been doing kind of 10-15 minute plugs with neighborhoods that have active neighborhood associations to connect with those neighborhoods, so.
Okay, anything else from Willow or anyone on this topic?
I just had a question. Do you know how many people have filled out the survey as of now?
I do. I have access to that information. I don't know it off the top of my head. It would take me a minute to find, but I could maybe try and find it while y'all are talking about Maze Bike.
Okay, I was just curious.
All right, let's move on to, yeah, thank you. Thank you. May is Bike Month, ATC ride and other events. And Sue's going to tell us about that.
Well, we had kind of tentatively talked about having an ATC bike ride in May. I think that the most likely date that we landed on was what would normally be our work session, our work group meeting, so it would be 2 Thursdays from now. And I mapped out a route that would take us out Santa Clara and River Road to a bunch of the upcoming projects that I thought a lot of us probably are not that familiar with. So the idea would be to keep it to a reasonable length of time. The actual ride would start at kind of Howard Street, which is in River Road. It's where the bike path goes on to the street there for a minute. There's plenty of places on the street to park a car if you need to drive there. If people want to, we could. I mean, anybody who has the time, we could meet at the Valley River Bridge, and it's just a 15-minute bike ride up to there. But if we include that 15-minute bike ride, both going and coming, that makes the whole thing end up being a couple hours. So I was thinking the actual ride would start, say, at 5:30 at Howard Street, right by the bike path. So it's kind of near the Owasso Bridge. Just look on Google Maps, will know where it is. And at say at 10 after 5, I'll meet whoever wants to at the Valley River Bridge, and we can ride down there to join whoever is driving or biking starting there. Anyway, then the route would go up, kind of follow the bike path, goes under Beltline up to, we can get to where we could see, we will look down Division Avenue, because there's that project with all the roundabouts on there. We're not going to go down there because we probably wouldn't survive the experience, but you can see where, you can see where that is at least. And then followed on up, Beaver, which then turns into Hunsaker. And that's where the West Bank path that will eventually go up to Madison Middle School will take off from. And we can see, and we can look on a map and see, it's not clear exactly where the path will go, but at any rate, the path will go through, somewhere through there, and reach up, near Madison Middle School. Then we will continue on there. The road changes its name to, once it gets to River Road, it changes its name to Irving, I think, or Irvington anyway. So we can go and see, and we can actually go through what will become Eugene's first protected intersection. Which I think Will is going to tell us a little bit about here. So that's at River Road in Irving. Then we'll have the exciting part of the ride. We will ride down River Road under Belt, cross under Beltline and go to Silver Lane.
Always fun.
Yeah, it's exciting. It can be done. I've done it many times. You will survive. And then probably go then turn right on Maxwell past the new high school that they're building. We can look at Grove, which is a street that the Safe House to School has been talking about for a long time, is that it needs improvements. And ride down there and come to Howard. And I think let's see, are there projects? I think there's some safe routes. I think there's some planned projects around in that area too, little improved crossings and stuff like that. And then we can take Howard right back to where we started from. So that loop would encompass 4 or 5 different projects that are upcoming. And it should take, the actual riding takes maybe half an hour. If we stop and talk, it'll probably take twice that. So rough, the ride should take roughly an hour, I'm hoping.
So it's May 25th, Thursday, May 25th, meet at 5:30 at. Where is it?
Yeah.
No.
Well,
that's-
it's Howard at Copping Street is what it actually is. It's where the bike path goes onto the street for a couple of blocks before you get back on bike path. So it's just south of the Owasso Bike Bridge.
And then if you want to ride out together, that's Valley River Bridge at 5:10. We can send this
Yeah.
out in an email
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
but it's in lieu of the work session. It is our work session.
And will you send out the routing as well, sir?
I can try. I don't have a very good mapping.
Just the names of the stops. That
Oh,
might be
okay,
enough.
sure. I can certainly
Yeah.
send a narrative description of it, whether I can actually
Yeah.
produce a map that you can read.
Yeah, that's fair.
Do you think, have you added it to the We Bike Lane calendar?
No,
Slash, do you want to?
Well, we thought about that. I mean, it's certainly, it's fine if other people want to show up. I'm not really looking for a big, massive community ride just because we're gonna stop and talk and we'll never get moving again if we get a lot of people. But I don't think we would get a lot of people show up. So we can put it on the calendar and just not talk about it a whole lot. We're certainly open to community members coming.
I think we should put it out there and
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you put it on the calendar, I don't think it's likely you'll get like a huge turnout.
just people who might be interested.
It's a flash mob showing up
Yeah.
at our ride. Yeah.
But you might get a person or two who's
Yeah.
really interested in
Yeah,
it.
which is fine.
Which
And
is
it's
good.
particular if it's folks, if it's folks who live out there or you guys want to.
Say Santa Clara neighborhood association.
Okay. Anything else about that? All right. Now we are at protected intersection at River Road, Irving. What is a protected intersection? I think this came out of the conversation that Willow and Sue had. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I put together that thing for your retreat, and it was, here's the main things that are happening in our world, here's the stuff that's getting built this summer. I didn't put this in here because I didn't really know about it. And my team didn't seem to really flag it as that important. Like, it's definitely not as high profile as like the two-way protected bikeway on High Street or 8th Street Town Square project. Like, we have some really high profile projects happening this summer. So this one just kind of fell down, but it's honestly really interesting and kind of exciting. So Sue was like, can we learn more about this? Like, why don't we know anything about it? So I'm here to share with you. So this is called protectedintersection.com. I think just some guy who's really passionate about it, maybe doing some research on it, made this page. It's just a single page, but he has this great video. It's 5 minutes. We don't need to watch the whole thing, but I thought we could watch part of it just to give an idea of what this is. Yes, if you want to grab the lights, that'd be great. And hopefully the sound works.
Urban planners and designers have finally figured it out. If your city is designed so that you can bike instead of drive, it will be a happier, healthier place to live. We know that protected bike lanes are the key to getting the average person to consider traveling by bike. Sharing busy traffic lanes with cars is absolutely unacceptable, and separation by a line of paint is often not enough. Protected bike lanes, also called cycle tracks, use curbs, planters, or parking to buffer bicyclists from moving cars. But there's still a problem. The protected bike lanes lose their benefits when they reach intersections. The buffer falls away, and you're faced with an ambiguous collection of green paint, dashed lines, and bicycle markings. One popular configuration is called a mixing zone, where cars and bikes share the lane. It doesn't matter how safe and protected your bike lane is if intersections are risky, stressful experiences. We need to make intersections just as safe and secure as the lanes that lead into them. What the protected bike lane needs is the protected intersection. Modeled after Dutch intersection design, the protected intersection brings the physical protection along with you as you ride through the crossing. A collection of design elements makes left turns simple and secure, right turns protected and fast, and provides straight-through movements that minimize or eliminate conflict from turning cars. With this design, riders will never feel stranded, exposed, or unsure of where to go and how to get there. There are 4 main elements to protected intersection designs: a corner refuge island, a forward stop bar for bicyclists, a setback bike and pedestrian crossing, and bicycle-friendly signal phasing.
Okay, I think I'm gonna stop it there because I don't want us to
I
watch
love
this
it.
entire video, but I'll put the protectedintersection.com link in the follow-up email. So if you do want to sit and watch the rest of the video, because it does have some more interesting stuff to say. Let's pull up the drawing for our protected intersection, which is kind of a hideous engineering drawing, but I can kind of describe what's going on here. I will say that this intersection is not it's not the ideal conditions like that one in the video. The one in the video was like, if everything were perfect, the intersection would look like this, but everything isn't perfect in the real world. And this intersection, you can just already tell it's like kind of long. You know, it's a different shape than just a perfect square intersection with 2 lanes coming from every direction. But we are, I think, going to make a really cool first try at a protected intersection in Eugene. Your question might be, why are you doing it on River Road and Hunsaker and Irving? Because it's kind of out there. It's really rare that the city needs to rebuild an entire intersection. And this was identified as needing a full rebuild. So they were like, we got to redo the ramps, we got to kind of redo everything. And since protected intersections are kind of the new best standard, like this is what, if we want to prioritize walkers and bikers, this is how we should be building intersections. Our team was like, if we got to rebuild an intersection, like let's do it right and try it, even if it doesn't necessarily quite connect into anything yet. So unlike in the video, there is not a protected bike lane on River Road. So it's not extending a protected bike lane into a protected intersection. You're on just a regular striped bike lane, and then you get to come to a protected intersection. This is River Road right here, and then Hunsaker and Irving are here. So you're biking in a regular painted bike lane, and then this little triangle is a concrete curb. So now it's become protected. So you're kind of entering into this little cutout with a physical barrier. And then this black line right here is what that like concrete barrier. But this thing here is like a skirt, like in a roundabout. So, and we have a few of these in town that are along the West MX corridor as well, where we're like, anyone in a regular car is likely not going to drive on that. It's more for the freight people. So folks who are turning freight in their big trailers can go on it without hitting the curb ramp. So you go here, there's a stop bar here for bikers. So you stop here, and then when you get your green light, you go down and over, and then you continue straight. Or you go down and over, and then you stop here, and you wait for another green light, and then you make your left. Or you can just make your right turn, and you're in a protected biker and walker only zone all the time. So one of the, I think, really important pieces of this is that people driving, in order for them to make their right turn onto Irving, they have to go like this, and then make a really sharp right turn. And if the biker's here, by the time they've made that, they're head on with people walking and biking. So that risk for right hook has been really decreased because they're not going to hit you with the side of their car. They're like looking at you. And so hopefully most people are looking at the windshield when they're driving. In which case they should like if you're looking at their windshield than they are to be looking like in their mirrors and out their side windows. So that is a big benefit. They're also going to be going way slower because they have to make this really sharp turn. So that's what a protected intersection looks like. This is kind of a funny thing. This is at 100% design like it's done. So this isn't an opportunity for you all to be like, you should do this instead because it's already done. It was done when I got here. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it before now.
No.
Yeah.
No, didn't even know it was happening.
Brought it up, Reed did, sorry.
Reed brought it up back before.
Did a presentation on it, if you
Okay.
remember.
I don't remember that. I remember
I
hearing
know,
about
I
it.
remember
Yeah,
hearing
he
it,
did
they're
a
seeing it like
presentation and he had pictures and stuff like that, sorry.
Yeah.
So that's great. I'm glad to hear that before I was here that, the ATC was like, had heard about it.
Are they doing anything with the signals? Do they?
Yeah, so I had a long conversation with Reed about this and we were looking at the signals and what he really wanted to communicate is that this is our first ever protected intersection and the signals are going to be subject to change. So we can practice, we can change things, but right now it is concurrent greens. So people who are biking will have, it'll be green, like basically you can go straight and even though these right turners have a green light, they're required to yield, which is the current condition at most intersections, is that the walkers get to go and bikers and green, regardless if they're turning right, but now they have to slow way down to make a sharp right turn, and by the time they see you, they're going straight. So that should help with that right hook issue. Any other questions about this?
Yeah, so you mentioned that they're redoing this whole one. Is there any mind being paid to like being able to take elements of this when they're redoing parts of other ones?
Like retrofitting existing intersections? Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that as of right now, that's not something we're looking at, likely because I think we want to get this built and see how it works and see like what features feel like they're worth making that effort on and which features maybe aren't like making that much of a difference or something like that. And then if it's a successful first ever protected intersection, like I think it's likely that we'll be bringing those lessons into future construction. Yeah, Sue and then Mary.
If somebody is trying to walk the South River Road, is it expected that they would be on the lower intersection or would they be out on the little triangular thing, like if they're trying to cross?
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. So here's the sidewalk. So if there's a person walking, they should be waiting here. They shouldn't be like waiting out in this kind of weird random little triangle spot.
It just seems like it might be hard for cars to see them.
Yeah, but they'll get a green to walk. And then they can kind of approach. I don't know, we'll see how it works. I'm not exactly sure, but they shouldn't be standing like in the bike lanes. The bike lanes will have their own sort of little crossing zone so that they can yield, and there's these sharp teeth that kind of tell the biker like the biker is responsible for yielding pedestrians there. So I'm not sure. We'll see. Because yeah, it's like I think there's talk of leading pedestrian intervals and leading bike intervals here as well, so that
Seems like you might want to have a little triangle.
Yeah. And honestly, maybe it's hard for me to tell based on this drawing because I'm not an engineer, like exactly where the pedestrian should stand, but that little gray square right there makes me feel like that's the spot.
In the Dutch ones, you usually will stand right next to the bikes. So like where the crosswalk is designated right there next to the bike lane, right next to the triangle. At least like that's how I've seen them used, whether they're designed that way or not is.
Yeah, and this does create a 2-stage left turn for people biking, which is not something we have in Eugene, but is the Dutch standard. So that'll be really interesting to see, like to hear from people who go out and bike this protected intersection, like what do you think about that? Because we're not used to it, but it is kind of the safest standard from a Dutch perspective.
I'm wondering, so that you said there's concurrent greens, which I like, but on 13th, for example, I think we were told that they couldn't do concurrent greens, and I wonder what that everybody has to have their own time according to MUPD, whatever. So
Right.
why is this different?
So this is different because it's a protected intersection.
Okay,
So there's a two-stage left turn.
so they have different standards if you designated a protected.
Right, and I think the two-stage left turn makes a really big difference.
Mhm.
And it's also not a two-way protected bike lane. It's just regular bike lanes.
Right.
And then the last thing is that I think there's push buttons involved with this intersection.
Mhm.
And I'm not exactly sure how that's gonna work.
Okay.
But we'll build it and we'll get out there and kind of see what happens. And like with the signal stuff, there's room to adjust. And we like saw that with 13th, where when it first went out, it was really funky. It's gotten, a little bit better. So that we should, and I don't know if it's gonna be like, I just don't even know if the bikers are gonna have their own bike signal or not, or if they're just gonna rely on the city driving signal. So anyway, still some things that remain to be seen. But I think it's a really exciting project and something that's gonna like be a cool experiment. I think.
So do we know what timing?
It's being built this summer.
Wow.
In fact, I believe they're
I
bringing,
mean, is the bike lane on Hunsaker gonna be finished?
No,
before that?
no, the bike lane on Hunsaker is still several years out. Yeah, so that's why it's kind of odd, that we're getting this really neat protected intersection, but nothing quite links into it yet. Yeah.
I was trying to ask, sorry to interrupt again, but I know Hunsaker's getting completely redone. That's partially in process right now, right?
It's in the planning process.
Oh, it's in the planning process.
Yeah.
It's not in the physical.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's where this will be done a good year or more before the Hunsaker project is finished. But eventually this will connect the river path, like not, there'll be bike lanes and bike infrastructure all the way to the river path from this intersection, and that's why it was kind of identified. But it's just with the funding schedules and stuff, it's just happening before. Okay, I think I'm probably out of time for that.
Yeah, thank you, Willow.
Thank you.
That's interesting. Okay, we are at project updates and information share. And I know that there's one from Alan, and then is there anything from Springfield?
Just a couple quick things. We have a couple of events for Bike Month too, if you guys are welcome to come over. We have one coming up tomorrow. There's a Friday art walk in downtown Springfield. And we're doing a safety check of the Shift Community Cycles is gonna do, minor bike repair, safety checks, that type of stuff. So that's going on. And then a week from tomorrow, the 19th, we're actually doing a thing called Roll to Restaurant, which is sort of a nice way to frame a pub. Right. And that's gonna start about 5:20 at the plaza there by the city hall downtown. And could take a ride out along the Millrace path and then head back to downtown and enjoy some of what downtown.
That's tomorrow.
What's that?
Tomorrow.
Yeah, well, tomorrow's the art walk, and then the 19th of the week is another week is the roll for restaurant. And yeah, and then, the big thing for us is this summer, project wise, is the West D changeover. They're gonna, where West D, where the North Bank path comes out on the West D Street, which is, there's gonna be an improvement in the interchange there, but I'm told, I haven't seen the plans, but that's been an ongoing issue, and there's gonna be traffic calming put on that section of the street with, speed bumps and it would have been nice to have gotten more, but it kind of.
There's parking. What do you think?
Anyway, so. And it's interesting that the CFAC presentation was great, because I think we're gonna get that next month too. So.
Oh, good. Thank you.
You'll be the expert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hear from Alan.
Okay, I'm gonna hold a site tour of the intersection at Alder Street and Franklin. So the continuation of the conversation from last month and in January about how to access the river path from the West Campus area, Alder Street, on June 1st at 5:30. So that's Thursday, June 1st. That's 3 weeks from today. Week before the next meeting, and it'll be on foot. So if you ride your bike, you'll find a place to walk up there. It's just all kind of really confined right there. I expect it won't be real long, probably less than an hour for sure. Then maybe 40 minutes or something like that. It's not that complicated, and I really hope you all can make it. I'm putting word out more widely. Hope a lot of people show up. What time? I'm sorry, 5:30. So the same time as this meeting, just 1 week early.
Yeah, it'd be great if a lot of ATC members could show up to that, so we can have a little more discussion about that, and, yeah.
Alder and Franklin?
Alder and Franklin, yeah,
That's where we meet at 5:30.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
That would be one place to put your bike, yeah, would be at the Bushnell.
The hotel was now.
Yeah, there's several places. There's also fences and other.
So what date is that?
June first,
June 1st.
5:20.
Okay,
Just everybody can see it. Thank you.
we've got the work session. Anybody want to talk about the work session that we had? I sent out minutes today from our work session because that's the first I got around to it. So there's that. I've got a couple points that I will just throw out there. We thought that when we were working on, we were talking about capital projects planning and how can ATC be effectively involved with these projects. And we had questions about how can we get engaged before it's too late. One thing that came up was we do not want to be a burden on transportation staff. However, we thought it could be really effective to meet with, for some of the key projects, to meet with the engineer on site if possible. You know, it might be asking a lot, but we thought if we really want to understand it and have some engaged dialogue, we were interested in that idea of meeting for a few of the most kind of important projects with the engineer. And we were wondering if we could get a list of which engineers are with which project, and that might help us a little bit. We won't do that without, you know, including you in that conversation or something, but that is something we thought would be helpful. We discussed the use of temporary projects, pilots, and tactical urbanism, and I know that's coming up more and more. And I think there was a lot of support for that, trying things out in an inexpensive way, just see how they work, and then, you know, and tweak that. So we discussed that. And the idea that for the summer, we thought that maybe instead of a meeting work session, we might do some infrastructure rides in place of, we'll just have it on that Thursday night that's 2 weeks after the regular meeting, and just go out and see what's being done and have discussions on site. So while the weather is good, we thought we would do some of that during the summer for the work sessions. Those are the key points. And then unless anybody else has any key points from our meeting, and then you could read the minutes as well. And then do you want to say anything about some of the transportation team events?
I've got a handful of things. The first thing I want to talk about is farmers market bike parking, which I know is always a hot issue.
Well, it's improved, it's improved.
No, I know the way I said that made it sound like it was good, but it's not.
Say there was nothing.
Yeah, so all of the bike parking that we got around the farmers market has been removed for a very specific reason. The entire 8th Street and park and everything is about to be completely ripped up. So they took all of those bike racks and they moved them onto Willamette. So they didn't go away. Now, if you bike down Willamette, it is like bike rack. Like they're everywhere on Willamette Street.
Hilarious.
So just like spread the word, let people know that if they're going to be biking to the farmers market, to park on Willamette Street, Willamette and 8th, Willamette and 9th, Willamette and 7th, like there's bike parking all over Willamette, and that's going to be the detour as well. So Oak Street is also getting repaved. High Street is getting the bike lane put in. Pearl Street is getting repaved, and 8th. So that whole zone is under a lot of construction this summer. So just go to Willamette. Like that's gonna be the spot.
So you're just gonna close it to cars? That would be so much better. Then they won't be in your way while you're doing it, and you'll be quicker.
Can I put that on the website, the farmers market website? about?
I'm gonna let them know for their newsletter,
Okay.
and maybe they can put it on the website. I'm basically like in there.
Time or two.
Yeah, I'm gonna reach out to them to try and help them, but this was another thing I wanted to mention, is that for pretty much any event that happens in town, the city is not responsible for providing bike parking. The event is responsible for providing bike parking. And in the past, the farmers market and the Saturday market have contracted to have valet bike parking at their event regularly. And they have since decided that they don't want to use the resources to do that. So I would encourage you all, like, if you want the farmers market to up their game with marketing to people who ride their bikes, making it easy and convenient for people to bike to farmers market, like, you need to tell them. So the city can do what we can do, but I think if the farmers market folks were hearing from you being like, we are an important clientele and you need to consider us, I think that could also go a really long way from a like business perspective.
And do you have a contact name?
I can find one for you. I don't know. I have the coordinator's name, but I'm not sure if she's necessarily the right person. So
We have
yeah.
3 more minutes.
I was gonna push back on
that
that a little bit, like, given
Yeah,
that they
she
spent all
was
this money
very
redoing the
good.
farmer's market
Oh,
pavilion.
bicycling.
And there's also just no bike racks in,
Right.
around any of those blocks.
Mhm.
That like, if the city wants to put its money where its mouth is about bike parking and people using bikes, I think the city should make the commitment to install bike racks to make it easier for events that are hosted there, rather than doing it on an event by event basis.
Right, and I think, I guess it's like a both and situation. So yeah, and I will say that once the 8th Street project is done, all that bike parking that we got will go back to those locations. And our team is ready to sort of push on the pavilion to be like, your bike parking needs to be up to code. Because as it stood right now, they didn't have enough bike parking even to satisfy the code. And that just isn't, like,
Wait,
I don't know
how
how
did that happen?
I don't know.
I
how
don't
it
see it
happened.
covered, which is ridiculous.
So
You know?
basically, once it's finished, that whole zone is, it's like, it's done. It's town square now. There's no
Yeah.
excuse. Like, it needs to have sufficient bike parking, and our team feels pretty strongly about that. So I totally agree with you, Daniel. Like, we're gonna be like, you need to, like, we as the city need to get bike parking here, and then also farmers market, you could like make it even more exciting for bikers to come.
Yeah.
Uh,
And the whole place that the city hall was gonna go, there's a lot of space there for God's
Uh-huh.
sake, you know?
So Willa, pick your poison. We got about a minute.
Okay, yeah, now I'm like just stalling. We have the open house in Bethel on May 16th from 4:30 to 6:30 at Willamette High School. So that's May 16th, Tuesday, May 16th, 4:30 to 6:30 at Willamette High School. I know that I asked you all to come to the pavilion one to help us out, but it was pretty mellow. So a lot of you showed up, which was super, super awesome, but you kind of just like milled around, and then it didn't really, I don't know if you felt like there was a place for you to sort of slot in and talk with community members. Like I said, we sent out 20,000 postcards for the Bethel Open House. I don't know how that'll translate into turnout, but it could be really busy. I'm not sure. I have no idea. So if you do want to attend, I would encourage you to attend kind of as a representative of Move Huge and show up ready to like talk with community members about
What are the hours on that?
4:30 to 6:30 at Willamette High School on May 16th.
What are the dates for the e-bike?
The e-bike expo is on June 10th. And the last thing I'll mention is that if you don't, you should read the In Motion.
Yeah.
Because I think I mentioned stuff that was in there in this meeting sometimes, and it seems like maybe there's a half and half readership. So like, it's a good place to get
It's very
transportation
good.
It's pretty
information.
good. It's a
I
good
also
place.
write it lovingly, so please read it.
We read it lovingly.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned.
So now,
There's also-
now we're not in
there's
the
also the
meeting.
Going by bike thing on the 20th.
Yes.
Yeah.
Turn off the Zoom and then.
Why is that out?
Oh,
Almost
So-
didn't get mentioned.
Tactical urbanism.